and I will try to fix you.
Back in 2019, round about the time Need for Speed Heat was releasing, the giant racing franchise was celebrating 25 years in the business. 25 years. That's by any account a huge period of time for a series to be hanging around. Unfortunately, instead of a thunderous celebration, this milestone was met with little fanfare. And nearly 3 years later, with the rumor mill suggesting we are again on the cusp of a new game's release, it just seems like no one is getting excited. If you were to look even a decade or 15 years back, you would see a stark contrast where they were releasing banger after banger and had the entire racing gamer community in the palm of their hand. So, what exactly happened? How did the largest racing game we have ever seen become just another open world racing option in a catalogue? And how can they rise from this lull to become the pioneers a lot of us have known them as and loved them for? It feels like I'm making these videos harder and harder each time to solve, but I am up for a challenge. This is how I would fix the Need for Speed series. To understand what I mean though, we will have to go back to the beginning. 1994. Two important things happened this year. Apartheid ended, and Need for Speed was born. Back then, it was still the era of teenagers racing to the shop to nip the latest car magazine, gawk at the beautiful exotics, take out the centerfold, and put it on their wall right next to the Playboy model. And the games that Need for Speed were bringing out at that time were kind of a love letter to that culture and era. The gameplay, the presentation, the style of the games had a sort of vintage feel to it, and back then the games were all about taking an exotic car, picking a track to race on, and absolutely belting it, or setting up police pursuit and see if you can escape the chase. This, coupled with an informative video commentary of all the supercars in the game, meant you had a unique racing experience and a time capsule of the 90s, quite like no other out there. Games that followed like Hot Pursuit and High Stakes would become classics in their own right, also allowing for super fun hijinks in their multitude of two-player modes. But, as I said in the beginning, competition has always been the crux of this franchise, and in 1997, we saw the beginning of that. While most of the games in their inception period had favorable reviews and were really tapping into previously untapped potential in this genre, it still harbored some criticisms, with a lot of people saying that the handling of the cars was quite shoddy, while others were concerned if the game had not a lot of fun into it or replayability, since there were only 8 or 12 playable exotic cars, depending on if you had the expansions or not. Now, it is worth understanding here that Need for Speed was definitely an authentic experience, just not a realistic one. In the same way Battlefield is an authentic experience, but something like Hell Let Loose is more realistic. So the opportunity was there for a game with more solid control over the car's handling and physics, that ran better technically, and had perhaps a wider variety of cars. I wonder who took that opportunity. How about one of the best-selling racing games of all time that birthed a series that is still hot and popular today? Say hello to Gran Turismo. With 140 cars to choose from, and a more technically sound and realistic experience and smarter AI races, it took the gaming world by storm and would go on to sell 11 million copies and start its own franchise. Not bad for Need for Speed's first competition, wouldn't you say? Luckily, this didn't affect our titular series too much, though it had definitely not much to offer anymore when it came to its initial sanctioned track day racing. it did have another ace up its sleeve with the police chases that had emerged, especially in the aforementioned Hot Pursuit and High Stakes games. It would start to imprint the character and identity of Need for Speed games that most of us would come to know today as the illegal street racer, ever on the run from the authorities and becoming an urban legend. And man, what a bunch of games it started this identity on, because this was by far the franchise's finest hour.
Need for Speed Underground.
Need for Speed's next few games were probably some of the most significant ones they ever put out. This is where they would build their reputation most of us are, or at least were, familiar with. Starting with the dynamic duo of the two Underground games. Released during the heyday of Japanese import street racing in the 90s and early 2000s, and off of the back of the highly popular first Fast and Furious movie in 2001, back when the movies were about cars, there was no doubt the timing on this could not have been any better. It was the first of their games to feature a career mode with a storyline, and while it wasn't anything to write home about, it did show that the series was once again taking strides into investing itself into its car culture. Gone were those exotic cars of before and entered the kitted out, tuned up street cars of the time. It also featured a garage mode where players could take their rides, do endless customization on them. Not only that, but track racing was no more either, as it made way for an all-out, hustling and bustling city, with an open world environment and real streets to tear your car through, which would become a staple of the franchise pretty much to this day. This game would go on to sell 15 million copies, pretty much solidifying its iconic status. It would be followed by the even better Underground 2, the original Most Wanted game that took a step away from customization and focused on the thrill of the chase of the police like its ancestors, and the always underappreciated Carbon, who combined Most Wanted's police chases and street races with a little bit of strategy with a buddy system during the races, which I also thought was very neat. It also had this kind of weird, I don't know, like boss level kind of take over territories, boss fight thing. It felt very kind of Japanese style. I did kind of like Carbon a lot. I don't know, I have a soft spot for it. I don't know how everyone else feels about it, but let me know in the comments, like genuinely. Now recall what I said in the beginning of this video about Need for Speed being a chameleon, because the simple fact is they've never been the same from game to game, and these three identities of them, the track racing, exotic car escape, the street racing, underground paradise, and the intense pursuit-evading cop chase thriller, would stick around till this day, and often the games would blur the lines between these identities frequently. But another simple fact is, no matter how much they changed, no matter how much they were different or radical, the competition still always came. Because in 2007, just as Need for Speed would take another crack at track racing with Pro Street, a new IP had appeared, and it would be another one to stick around. Forza 2 had just dropped, and the future series was starting to hit its stride quite handsomely. Now, track racing has, at this, already been pretty much dominated by Gran Turismo, that was at its fourth installment since its inception 10 years ago. But bear in mind, Gran Turismo was a PlayStation exclusive, which meant Xbox gamers at the time had to pretty much be comfortable with what Need for Speed offered. Now, no more. And while the rivalry between Gran Turismo and Forza going forward would not affect Need for Speed all that much, it did mean that it kind of lost its appeal for its track racing with these two in the mix. Try as they might, though, when they even collaborated with Slightly Mad Studios to make the two Shift games that are kind of still overlooked to this day. It should also be noted that as much as Need for Speed tried to keep it fresh, tried to be different, it was in the most radically different new games where it just didn't give it enough support and love, and ultimately, I feel, dropped the ball with them. The first one I hadn't even actually mentioned yet, as it was kind of sandwiched between the transition from that exotic car track racing to the illegal street racing. But back in 2000, Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed was the first and only racing game in their series to focus on a single manufacturer. It was effectively an appreciation montage to the factory, with the game taking 50 years of Porsche machines and having you race them from 1950 all the way to 2000, showing off their proud heritage. Well, mostly proud. The other two missed opportunities I felt would be that of Need for Speed Undercover in 2008, a game I genuinely liked in its focus again on police pursuits and in an attempt to make a more fleshed out story in the game, even if it was perhaps a little bit cliche. Having a good layered narrative in a racing game has still never to this day really been done, and I know this should be a secondary objective behind your racing experience, your actual gameplay as it is no less of a selling point in an ever-growing competitive genre. Why not just add that little more effort into it? The other one I felt was the interesting back-to-back games of the MMO Need for Speed World and The Run. Two games not talked about nearly as much as the others in the series, but both with neat but unfortunately underutilized ideas. While combining the maps of Most Wanted and Carbon seemed like a great idea on paper, Need for Speed World removed the single-player elements and just didn't put enough effort into the MMO aspects. It had the makings of a good game that just underwhelmed. The same can be said for The Run, where a trip across the United States racing in different cities sounded amazing, but ultimately long stretches in between just made it lose too much steam. Incidentally, we would see both these ideas being implemented to quite a bit of success by Ubisoft in The Crew 2, meaning the opportunity was there 7 years ago for Need for Speed to do this. The competition around this time just grew and grew. Developers Criterion Games had been doing a little project called Burnout for a few years now. Some of you might know it, which was effectively a fun city track racing game with a twist where you could absolutely wreck your opponents out of the race, which meant you kind of got this real different kind of adrenaline rush. And then they released their own magnum opus, an open world paradise. It seemed like a game that could give Need for Speed a proper run for its money, with a city to explore every nook and cranny and jam-packed with things to do. I remember when I was playing my Let's Go Retro series recently, and back then, I would literally look for every shortcut in that game, try out every corner, try out anything I could, and the game just made it so much fun and addicted to go explore the city. But what would be EA's response to this kind of radical Burnout Paradise amazing thing that's coming out? Well, they did the most EA thing ever. They bought Criterion.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money, money.
Did reap the fruits of this with two excellent games developed by the British developers in the form of the rebirths of Hot Pursuit and Most Wanted, which had both noticeable elements of that Burnout Paradise in them. But you can't buy all your competition. And in 2011, another open world racing sensation would make its mark. There, on the horizon, a familiar foe appeared.
On the count of 10, everything you've ever known fades away.
You will be in Horizon. I say 10.
While not so much concerned with illegal street racing and city adventures, Forza Horizon had thought outside the box by making an entire map a sanctioned track race, essentially, where the whole place would be a celebration of speed and you can go where you please in a map filled with as much beautiful winding roads as there were frolicking fields of no roads. It was as if Tomorrowland had met Goodwood's Festival Speed, and it was glorious. It still is glorious. And it's round about here, in this modern period of time, where we find ourselves with our franchise. After Most Wanted 2012, EA had given the developing rights to Ghost Games, previously EA Gothenburg. And I kind of felt there was a mindset change here, where they felt all they were good at is illegal street racing and police pursuits. And while the games that followed were still very different experiences, such as Rivals with its haunting dual storyline, or the Need for Speed reboot that was bathed in night and looked to harken back to Underground, or Payback that felt a little like Hot Pursuit and Undercover had a love child. It just didn't feel like it stood out perhaps as much as the rest did before. It could be saturation, it could genuinely be, but now just racing games were just so much more competitive than ever before. But you just had to have way more selling points than just being an open world racing game. That just doesn't cut it anymore. Now, I will hold my reservations with Heat, as I am still waiting patiently for me to get to it in my game library. But the fact is that while I think it is good that Need for Speed is trying to reinvent itself every game, I just think it is changing for all the wrong reasons. So in this age of saturation, how do I think the franchise should change itself to finally be its own thing again? I think the main thing that Need for Speed needs to inject back into the games is that culture that they managed to capture so well back when they were just exotic car centerfold races and when they were in the underground racing scene. That ingrained culture is what truly is the soul of racing games. Like how well Forza Horizon portrays a speed festival and how everyone from rally cars, supercars, hot hatches, the lot come together to celebrate their hobby, their passion. Or how Forza and Gran Turismo both capture the intensity of track day racing and everything that comes with it. It's this culture that Need for Speed has captured and was so close to capturing again so many times, but ultimately just didn't fully grasp it and watched it slip through their fingers. It could be through another game that could maybe explore the heritage of car manufacturers, maybe like Ferrari's history, or even their rivalry with Ford, or you can make a whole tribute to BMW and just have a game where nobody uses their indicators. Or you could have a game set in a past time period where street racing was at its peak, like hot rodding in the 1960s or the import racing in Japan in the 90s. Actually, why is Need for Speed almost always set in the United States? Do they just kind of feel a draw there or something? I just realized that's weird. At the end of the day, it is imperative for the developers to realize that it is this culture which fuels the racing gamer community at its core. And no matter if you are a chameleon, it is at the end of the day not the fact that you can change colors, but how the colors look, which should be important. But again, those are my 2 cents. I wanted to do this video a little bit differently, and I hope you enjoyed this type of format. But it's difficult, especially for such a long-standing series, because how do you keep reinventing yourself? How do you try and stay relevant? But I know they will find a way out of the slump. And whether it is with this newly teased game coming in December, it is too early to say. But yeah, I don't know. It is a bit too early to say. But I want to hear from you guys. How do people that's been following this Need for Speed game series for long feel about this? How do they feel how it should be going forward? Be sure to just leave your feedback for me in the comments, because I highly appreciate reading every single one of them. And just the support these videos receive, it's just, again, it's been humbling. I don't know how to really put it into words, because, I mean, I've never had videos like this with so much support. It's staggering. So just, yeah, thank you everyone again for watching this. And remember,